Session 5. Your life is a fractal hero's journey. You may have gathered by now that the way I like to teach is to circumambulate a subject. I approach it from different angles, and I keep showing it from different angles. That is the only way that I know how to teach and to learn. And aside from that, it really is the process of implementation and practice and embodiment. So intellectually, I like to express things from different angles and to circumambulate the topic. I wanted to almost do it to a nauseating degree so that you really, really get it. And then once you've understood it and it's really been grokked at the intellectual level, then it's really all down to practice. Transformation, healing does not happen without actually walking the path. It's what Morpheus said to Neo. There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. And it is true for all of us with regards to transformation. At some point, you have to stop reading books about meditation and you just have to sit on your ass, shut your eyes, bring your awareness inside and see what happens. And you learn and you grow. And the same with healing. So in this particular module, I'm just going to explore the hero's journey and how everything that we've been talking about affects you on a really massive fractal level. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to dive right in. I also kind of call it the 5 stages of every challenge, although you could round it down to 4 stages, but you'll understand what I mean. So the 5 archetypal stages of every challenge. And by challenge, we mean every important mountain that you climb in your life, right? There's a start, there's a middle, there's a hard part, there's completion, and there's celebration. And that just, as I was talking about in our last module, that just repeats in your life. I want you to really, really understand that. It doesn't matter what you think you're doing, having a relationship, the first stage of a relationship, giving birth, raising a child, writing a book, starting a company, executing on a mission critical project. It does not matter what you're doing. These are all challenges. These are all hero's journeys, and they all have 5 archetypal stages. The beginning, the middle, the hard part, the dragon fight it's sometimes called, the completion, the end, and then the celebration. And the first 2 of these influences on what you might as well call your monomythic hero's journey pattern is childbirth and potty training. So I believe it was Stan Grof who really identified to us the birth matrices in childbirth. I'm not going to go into that in detail, but if you want to know where some of this original information came from, Stan Grof, we have to tip our hat to. He didn't necessarily connect it to the health later in life, but he showed us the stages. So in childbirth, essentially, you have these stages, right? You have the beginning. And the beginning is paradise. You're in the womb. You've never had a challenge in the world. Believe it or not, some people spend their whole life trying to get back there and never starting any challenge at all because they are stuck in that original place. Anyway, that's beside the point. You have the beginning where you are in Eden. It is an Edenic beginning where every need you have is provided to you and you have to make no effort. It is a perfectly passive state of plenitude. There is the beginning, the middle part, where you could say you start to get a little bit big for the womb, right? This is in the gestation process, right? That you could say the first several months, but at some point, the baby grows big enough that the womb starts to get a little cramped. That's kind of the beginning or the end of the middle and the beginning of the hard part. At some point, this paradise literally begins to contract, right? It actually, like, that which was the perfect plenum. There's a term for it, I believe. It's the summum bonum. It's basically where everything is perfect, begins to actually turn into its polar opposite, which is that which is threatening and attempting to take your life. That's literally what happens in childbirth from the perspective of the child. There's a sense where suddenly you are in enormous danger, right? And you are being expelled from the garden, right? And that's when the contractions start and then becomes the final piece where it's at its most terrorizing and terror-inducing. Also, there are many complications that can take place. You can be breech, you can have the cord around your neck, There might have to be a cesarean. There are many elements in those final moments that can take place. You can be early, you can be premature. Also, it can actually be delayed. And suddenly you can find yourself in a 36 7 hour labor. All of these variations on the first imprint of the hero's journey are possible for us. And that's why it's so important for us to understand, if we can, our birth story. Because our birth story, as I've said, will imprint the first. I might not go so far as to say, yes, I mean, we call it trauma, right? I mean, birth is a trauma. And the idea is that where those particular traumas take place in the hero's journey, in the 5 archetypal stages of birth, that's an imprint. That's an imprint that can repeat later in life. And so you want to know it. You know, were you not able to get out of, was it an interminable end to your birth? That could relate to not being able to finish. Were you premature, right? That always means that you're a little too early for things, or you get thrust into things when you're not ready. Was there no celebration at the end of it? Were you not able to immediately nurse skin to skin with your mother? Were you put into an incubator as a result of some medical complication, right? Which would also then echo down the line of your life, that after, summiting great mountains or small mountains in your life, you're not able to actually return to that place of celebration and gratitude and dopamine, as we talked about. And in this case, oxytocin, the greatest of all the neurochemicals in my mind, because it's all about bonding and all about being in the network of love and connection around you, and ultimately to all life and to spirit itself, himself, herself. So each one of these elements can have a complication, and we want to know about it because it can rhyme with the rest of your life. That's the first embossing of the hero's journey on our life. The second imprint of the hero's journey on our life is potty training, right? It's the second one that has all the same 5 archetypal stages. There's a start, there's a middle, there's a hard part, there's a completion, and there's a celebration at the end. So with potty training, of course, how can it go wrong? Well, it goes wrong in many different ways, but 2 of the main ways that it goes wrong is that either you're left to your own devices and you screw the whole thing up and you shit all over the bathroom, or you're micromanaged and you're completely undermined and disempowered by an overbearing helicopter parent. Either way, once again, those particular elements will imprint into the psyche, and they will create a little kind of traumatic vortex around the particular stage at which the dysfunction took place, right? So, for example, if you're overdue by several weeks and you can't get out, and the labor takes forever, and you can't really even start the process, for example, and perhaps you never get out of diapers. It happens again. Suddenly you're not out of diapers and you're kind of learning potty training really late. You have both of those, then you have a sure recipe for someone who has difficulty starting things. Okay. And once again, you might have implicit memories that need to be healed, and support systems and scaffolding that need to be identified at that particular stage of really any project, right? So with potty training, what you want to do is you want to experience, and I say this to parents all the time, you want to support your child, you want to encourage them, and you want to attune to how much support they need, and not give them any more and not give them any less. It is the Goldilocks zone of support. And that's, as parents, what we want to do, because every time we cross over one line or another, we're literally creating a distortion field for the child in that particular way, either to be disempowered, I can't do anything on my own, or I have to do everything on my own. And either way, there are negative implications to that. So that's important for you to find out if you can. And if you're a parent, just recognize these 2 stages of the child's growth are essential to track. And of course, don't get me wrong, we have all the best plans in the world for childbirth, and they don't always go that way. And that's okay too. What's important is just your awareness of what took place and then tracking it. Because especially with childbirth, if you have any, variations on the most perfect birth imaginable, which most people do have, You just wrap your awareness around that and just track the child in that particular area. Was it at the beginning? Was it at the end? Was it early? Was it late? Et cetera, et cetera. You get the point. All right. So here it is. Know your birth story. Yeah. Bliss, being squeezed, life is in danger, birth, nursing, and all the other variations on it. Know your potty training story, facing the challenge, getting the job done, so to speak, returning to the world celebration, or where you were really helped, micromanaged, neglected, humiliated, learned too quickly, or stayed in diapers for too long than the norm. Learning too quickly is actually okay, but sometimes there can be a side effect to that if you're pushed into things too early. I've known a lot of people who were pushed into things too early, and it can become a trend in their life. What it means is they don't really get enough time to mature at the rightful stage of themselves. And, they're watching violent movies too early. This can actually evolve into entering into relationships and sexuality too early. You know, being exposed to the darker side of life a little too early. In Greek mythology, this would be the Persephone myth, right? Persephone was taken into the underworld. She essentially was violated. She was married to Hades, and since she was chronically depressed for half of the year during winter, and it was really Hermes, at the behest of Zeus, who told Hades, let her go. So any woman, especially who has been kind of taken by the darker sides in one way or another, either by abuse or by neglect, or by being pushed into quote unquote maturity too early, as a preteen, you will have the Persephone myth activated. And what they need in those moments certainly is to go back to those earlier stages of maturity that they never really integrated, right? They have to go back to a more innocent time. There's more to say about that, but I'll just maybe stop there. So the question is, which, if any, stage deviates from the archetypal sequence, right? And here's where it gets really interesting, right? So you've got childbirth, you've got potty training. Now here's your life, right? The birth pattern and potty training, they're right there as an archetypal pattern in the beginning. And your traumas are on top of that. And perhaps you can have past life influences. Those are there. You have to kind of include those. And what you have is you have one big hero's journey in your life, right? And once again, any deviations in the first two hero's journeys, the birth and potty training, will create conditions for repetitions of those deviations in the hero's journey later in life. But that's not all, right? And here it is: difficulties in starting, in finishing, in celebrating, which means resting between milestones, in dragon fighting, processing emotion along the way, asking for help, all of those things. And so what happens is that we get these little deviations in there. And here's the part that I'm actually trying to get to. Yeah, that's it. So I've done a wonderful little drawing here. I'm hoping you guys can understand it. I'm not the greatest graphic artist. But what I'm trying to show here is, you see, there are smaller journeys along the way of our main hero's journey. I mean, every day, every week brings hero's journeys. And so you want to start to think of the deviations and the discrepancies in the 5 archetypal stages of your hero's journey. You want to recognize that they are happening all the time if they are there. Difficulty starting, difficulty finishing, difficulty celebrating, difficulty for asking for help. You want to actually identify that it's not just on the big projects of your life. These are happening constantly. This archetypal loop of overcoming challenges, of climbing mountains, it's ongoing all the time. Just going to the store and picking up groceries. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, there's a beginning, a middle, a hard part, an end to that process, right? Like remembering everything, paying the bill, making sure your card doesn't get rejected for lack of funds. I mean, you can start tracking all these little areas and you will notice trends once again. And that's because the Nautilus shell repeats. And so what you'll see here is that if I just move these across, these little stars are supposed to represent the deviations. If you actually notice on this particular Nautilus shell, there's this little deviation here. It's a little kind of divot almost, right? This divot starts about here. I don't really see it here. I don't see it here. I don't really see it before, but it starts about here. And then suddenly it gets a little bit bigger. And as time goes on, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger until really here. And then it starts, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the process of nature, right? That's within us. That's literally what happens to these deviations in our life. And whenever I meet somebody from the outset, I mean, I notice it immediately. And I think we're going to have a bonus a module around identifying this as a practitioner, because I think it's still useful for those of us who are not practitioners. And I'll give you just a little heads up right now. It's this idea that I tell practitioners, when you get the opening email from someone, is it 4 pages long? What does that mean when you get an opening email from a client that's 4 pages long? That means they're a boundary crosser and they have no boundaries. And their trauma has something to do with being overexposed. They were overexposed. You can tell just from that opening email. Um, if someone arrives and they've got all the goodwill in the world, but they're late, they're 5 minutes late the first session, then they cancel the next session. I mean, it's so classic. I mean, now that, when you start to see it all like this, it suddenly becomes nauseatingly obvious. But I tell you, when you first begin to actually notice that this is happening in so many people's lives in a kind of global way, in a fractal way, from start to finish, in the big heroes' journeys of their lives and in the small ones, right? As this poor diagram attempts to illustrate, in the small heroes' journeys within the bigger heroes' journeys, you just can't believe that it comes down to some degree to such simple fact as traumas that have been undiagnosed, unrecognized, and continue to be unhealed. And so this is a great way of really identifying that. So this is why we map our traumas, right? See, I'm circumambulating back to our area where we talked about pre-preparation, implementation, assessment, right? There's a place and a time where you are dysregulated, and I guarantee you it's going to pop around, of course. But if you track it, you will see it is reliably, perhaps on a day, on a week, on a month, and there's going to be something on a calendar year. It just will be. And the more you understand this, the closer you bring your own healing capacity to bear on those traumas, on those parts of you that are dysfunctional. Who do I become? Which subpersonality? We talked about this in the previous module. What's the original wound that this is a defense from, right? What are the triggers? What is my rationalization that everything is fine and all this stuff that Zach's talking about is bullshit? Because we all have rationalizations, right? Some are more comprehensive than others, you could say. And that would be the stages of readiness. Maybe I can even go back because that might be interesting just to, we have stages of readiness of people. Like I didn't understand this when I first began this work because I just thought, your life's a mess. Why wouldn't you want to just heal it? And I found that a lot of people don't really, they're not ready for it. It's actually too disturbing. Their ego strength is too fragile. And so you have to be very compassionate. And this could be your partner, and then you have to work in a very nuanced and careful way. And you have to be compassionate. Just because you see all this stuff or you're ready for it doesn't mean that your partner is, or, some of your children are. A lot of this stuff is extremely disturbing content for us to metabolize, to masticate, right? And for our teeth not to fall out in a dream. And so, stage one is this doesn't make sense, how quaint, what interesting concepts, I'll pass. Stage two, this is laughable, this is ridiculous, there's a little more energy there, it's funny, the resistance gets bigger when they're actually closer. Stage three, this is dangerous, I think you're crazy, I need to get away from this. Stage four, this is, well, maybe stage three just goes to stage five, but at some stage four, it's like, wow, this is scary, but then I need it. I think I'm ready for this, and I'm ready to take this on. And you don't want to really approach something before that. You always want to be taking, riding shotgun to someone's development. You don't lead, you follow. These are old psychoanalytic adages, and we got to follow them because they're fantastic. So let's go back to where we were. What do I need? From whom? In what way? In what moment? And I might end up doing another kind of deeper dive into the moment of somatic healing. Because when I went over the last module in my own mind's eye, I want to make sure that maybe we offer another element for those who are going to be working with this. I think I covered quite a lot of it, but I want to make sure everyone feels really good with the fact that at some point you are going to be sitting with someone's dysregulation, and you're going to be afraid, and you're not necessarily going to know what to do. And you might have to be sitting there with some notes to look down at the notes, because other people's dysregulation will trigger our own dysregulation. And what you don't want to be doing is getting into a category 5 storm where both of you are underwater. And so, once again, maybe just the simple instruction is always remember whoever is less triggered has more responsibility to shepherd the situation to healing, period. Whoever is more triggered is more vulnerable, is actually weaker, and does have to take responsibility for that. And if they can't at least sit there and slightly work and be receptive, then they have to take space. But the idea would be that the more you spoke about this, the more people, and it just happens normally, naturally, the more you talk about it, the more you set it up, the more you do the pre-production work that we've spoken about, the more individuals are going to feel safer, even in their dysregulation, to sit there and say, I'm really angry, I'm really pissed off, I'm actually angry at you. And you can say, well, hold on. Like, I hear that you're angry at me. Let's just take a breath, right? What are you feeling? Where do you feel it? What does this remind you of? Does this remind you of anything from before? Does this relate to your parents in any way? You just start playing around with it like that. And you will find they will go down there, but they will only go down there to the degree to which they feel safe with you. And that's one of the interesting things about healing, is that one thing I've noticed is that the psyche that is being healed, right? In this case, it would be the client or the healee. The psyche of that healee is extremely intelligent, and they will actually poke you, the healer, the partner, whoever, they will poke you in all ways to see, are you actually solid enough to do this work with me? It took me a long time to see that. I used to think there was a defense involved in it, and sometimes they are defending, but a lot of times those defenses are actually testing you because you're not ready, right? You're still rolling your eyes, right? You're dysregulated. You're not taking me seriously, or you're just shit scared. And how am I supposed to go into my stuff and actually heal when you're quivering in your boots? You got to get a little stronger. And the way that we handle that is we keep returning to the table. You keep attempting it. It's the same with the heart meditation, the sovereign meditation, the executive meditation, all of which I'm hoping you're going to practice. The more you jump in the water, the stronger an emotional swimmer you're going to be. It's that simple, and there's no getting around it. So if I can behave myself, co-regulation is the privilege. If I can't, well, you're going to have to go and take some space on your own and self-regulate. And so what you're really doing is we're putting some hearts around these areas. We're identifying where they are, and you're putting, you're supporting those moments. And I guarantee you, I've probably put too many minotaurs here because none of us have this. I mean, that's not true. Some people have trauma everywhere. It's true. And their whole lives have become stilted and petrified, paralyzed in place. But for the top of the bell curve, most of us have issues in one or two places. And usually what I have found is one main area. So it's not just love that heals, it's skill acquisition. You have to learn these skills. Upgrading behavior from a regressive, primitive trauma reaction to a sophisticated, at least more sophisticated, integrated response. And this is the difference between destiny and fate. I want to just bring that in just because I think these are powerful words. Your fate is what happens if you don't address your conditioned self and the traumas that you have been given and the conditioning that you have been indoctrinated by. That's your fate, right? Your destiny is the hero's journey that you take to your true potential, right? That's why destiny and fate are not synonyms. They're not. In fact, fate means to predict and destiny means to establish, right? There you go. So with fate, your future is predicted by your past, right? What's the expression? Or prefaces, someone will know this, right? Like the future is predicted by the past. Like a prologue is preface is prologue, or present is preface, or anyway, there's an expression that we all know. Another way to look at it, and here is actually the hero's journey, is that and this is just another angle, right? There are those 5 archetypal stages, but also you can map what I'm talking about onto the actual stages of the hero's journey, which are a little more elaborate, right? So, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, meeting a mentor, crossing the threshold, allies, tests, enemies, approach to the innermost cave, which would be the deep trauma, the deep challenge, the ordeal in the abyss, facing the shadow self. That's facing the dragon. That's really being there, confronting the subpersonality in a live fire moment. Okay. Apotheosis. That would be the ascension, into heaven, the ultimate boon. Refusal to return, not wanting to go back to the world. The road back home, the master of the two worlds, returning with special knowledge. This is an archetypal journey. And certainly those within the chronic illness world, like, praise be to you guys, because that has been certainly part of my journey. Anyone who's in the chronic illness journey is going through this. They're being invited into a special world, into a dark, shadowy underworld. And you are being invited there to combat the dragon, seize the treasure, and return back with the boon, right? That's what the apotheosis is. The apotheosis is Hercules' ascension into heaven after having succeeded in the 12 trials, right? And so, the bigger the challenge, the bigger the boon. And so I say that to everyone who's working with chronic illness or who's going through tremendous ordeal. And as long as they can be supported and they can understand that their journey is an ancient archetypal process for which we have untold number of stories and tales and movies and songs that are really encouraging and empowering. They can take that journey. And so here's another just funny diagram I've done that you can say, within the larger process, there are, once again, it's a fractal. There are smaller processes: the day, the week, the month, the year, who, what, who, when, why, how. And if we can get through this, the obedient soldier can become the warrior in the Matrix. Mr. Anderson can become Neo. The unworthy hero can become King in the Lord of the Rings. And these beautiful people who we started with, who have all these traumas everywhere, well, they can go on a journey too. And here's something I would like to tie in. Because as I said, I kind of hinted at this a few times, is that our traumas are like a star constellation. And by which I mean they create an archetype, like the scapegoat, like the villain, like the victim, like the narcissist, like Echo, who's the overgiver and the accommodator, the pleaser. Our traumas are archetypal roles. And trust me, you're not so special and unique that your traumas are so exotic that they have not been spoken of and forsoothed by generations of poets and artists. They have. I guarantee you, scratch the surface of your patterns and it will show you one of the Greek myths. It will show you something in the Viking lore and in the fairy tales, certainly in modern cinema. And that's a good thing. You don't want to be so exotic that you've never been seen before. That you don't want that, and I guarantee you are extremely likely not. And so when you find what you are, you might begin as a constellation that is a camel. The one who bears the burdens of the world silently on their back and walks apparently endlessly through a desert. But if you take the words of Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the great philosophers, you will understand, as he so rightfully did, that the camel of the conditioned self, of the indoctrinated self, the old regime that we are given, the clothes that we're given, the mask that we are given in the first half of our life, even if it's the first 20 years or the first 30, it's only the first stage. And as Nietzsche said, you start as a camel. And if you can transform past that and start to recognize these things, you actually turn into a lion. The lion is the part of you that roars, that says no, that says enough, that says I'm done with that role and I'm going to usher in a new one. And you have to be okay with making a little bit of noise and making some mistakes and stumbling and scratching a few people, including yourself. If you want to transform without making any mistakes, it's not going to happen, period. I tell everyone who transforms, be very, very compassionate and appreciative of yourself when you take these initial steps, because they're going to be wrong. You're going to make mistakes, but you have to love yourself enough to be able to do that. And that's the stage of the lion. And the stage that follows the lion, as Nietzsche told us, is the child. And what that really means is that you are born again. And it's a real thing. It absolutely happens. And you have an entirely new existential ecosystem within yourself and without that you begin to grow and develop. And I've done this with individuals for 2 decades at this point. And it's a wonderful, wonderful process. And I hope if you feel that you're on the cusp of your own, that you'll embrace it, because that is what makes life really enriching and exciting. If you're not living the hero's journey in your own life in a true and real way, tied in with your traumas, you're going to feel like the Bruce Springsteen song, yeah, life goes on even after the thrill of living is gone. Like that's what it's going to feel like. You're going to feel so bored because that's the fate of the interminably conditioned life, the conditioned self. I meet people all the time, 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. They're still in their conditioned self. They're still in the camel. Like they never made the transition. It's heartbreaking. It's fucking heartbreaking. There's nothing to say either. How dare I? What am I supposed to say? I say nothing. I'm just sweet and I'm kind, but I can see that they're still covered in all of these ways, all of these armored ways in which the trauma came, developed the zombie suit of armor. And so they're covered, almost like Phantom of the Opera or something. Half of them is covered and they can't really move in this direction. You start talking about death or money or sexuality or whatever. You just watch them. They can't take it. All these different conversational pieces. And, you take them to a party. They can't dance. Of course they can't dance. Their body is too littered with the vacuum of trauma. How are they supposed to move in, earthy and sensual ways? It's just not possible. And if they did, it would probably be woven into some perverse idea or some overly self-conscious, guilt trip that they would put upon themselves. There would be nothing innocent. There would be no child. There would be no child. And so please bear in mind that this journey is, as my good mother used to say, it's the greatest game in town. All right, heroic arcs. Just to remind everyone, the exile comes home, the silent one speaks out, the fool becomes a reformer or a truth teller or a whistleblower. The tyrant becomes magnanimous, the boundary crosser develops empathy, the overgiver develops boundaries, the coward faces their fears. And myths, they're all descriptions of subpersonalities and overcoming trauma via heroes' journeys. The devouring father, Uranus, Kronos, the scapegoat, Prometheus, Christ. Devour, and I'm not suggesting that Christ was a myth. Just for those of you out there, you're going to grab me on that. The devouring mother, Medusa, victim perpetrator. There were some other devouring mothers. The female victim of the devouring father or pathological male was Persephone or Inanna, the Sumerian tale. Male heroes, and we don't have enough. Yeah, we have some female heroes. Good. So the male heroes, Perseus, Theseus, Parzival. And the common traits of the hero, they have an absent father. They have a dual birth. It's like Superman. He has a dual birth, right? And an absent father. One father is godlike. One father is earthly. And they're exiled oftentimes. So always remember that. That's actually really an archetypal truth. Perseus overcomes Medusa. Theseus faces the Minotaur. Parzival discovers the Grail. Oh, I should do something on Parzival because that's another amazing myth about the hero's journey. The female heroes, Ariadne, just one of the greatest. I have a lot of love for Ariadne. Circe, one of the greatest. Madeline Miller wrote just an incredible book on Circe and also the Song of Achilles, both wonderful. Isis, I do have an ebook on an interpretation of Isis and Osiris, Ariadne and Theseus and the Minotaur, and Cupid and Psyche. Please check that out if you're really interested in the deeper meanings of these archetypal mythological patterns, because they do live through us. And I always say to everyone I work with, find your myth. Like, once again, you are not so unique. Trust me. Homer wrote about you. Ovid wrote about you. All these guys, they did. Like, find it, because they show the trajectory, period. And if you don't know your myth, man, you don't know yourself. So the fate of the pathological male, be careful, man. Minos, Ajax, Icarus, Hercules. I mean, Hercules did have his apotheosis. He succeeded, but still, you do not want to have the fate of the pathological male. The narcissist, of course, Narcissus and his consort, Echo. You do not want to be Echo. The overgiver, oh, well, there she is. I'm writing it in. It's actually right below. So Echo is the overgiver, the classic. And the bad marriage, I would just say Hera and Zeus. I mean, it's just appalling. Bad marriage is Hera and Zeus. I would say the slightly better marriage is Arthur and Guinevere. The slightly better marriage, the true transformational marriage, and I should probably do something on this because I talk about it all the time in my practice, is the Rosarium, the wood carvings of the Rosarium. That is where the couple truly blends psyches, and you actually take from your externalized anima figure if you're a man, or from your externalized animus figure if you're a woman. You actually integrate and introject what they have that you need, which is why you found them in the first place. That's the true relational transformational marriage. And the wood carvings of the Rosarium are beautiful because they show it in just perfect unconscious symbolism of the husband and wife stepping into a coffin together and dying and being reborn as one. And that's a real thing. So maybe I might have a bonus section just on the couple, because even now today, in a lot of couples work and couples counseling and couples therapy, we're missing the transformational piece. That your partner is your externalized opposite sex reflection, period. And there's something you're trying to get from them as a neural net, as a certain behavioral trait, as a psycho-emotional dynamic. Like you're literally trying to get it from them. That's also the caduceus. These are the two snakes, right? We live in a universe of duality, of polarity. And so what we really are trying to do with our polar opposite, our complementary opposite, you could say, right? It's the yin and yang, is you want to merge and you want to extract that. And then you want to become two wholes that are holding up like two columns, one temple of unity. It's a little esoteric, but I think you get the point. All right. Here's just something maybe I would just throw in towards the end. This is one of the great sayings of the old psychoanalysts, from Freud's time, and Theodore Reich and others. They said, identify. Well, actually, I think they use the word analyze. Analyze defense before content, which is very difficult to understand. But really, what they mean is analyze the defense of the wounds before you analyze the wounds. This is such a wonderful guiding principle. So before you try to analyze someone's traumas, analyze the defense of their traumas. Analyze how they avoid or suppress or repress or manage their traumas. Analyze that first. Then you're doing it in the right archetypal order, because you're basically peeling the onion from the outside rather than just avoiding all of those defenses and going straight for the core. Don't go straight for the core. It's a schoolboy error. It's a novice error, right? Analyze defense before content, before wound. Analyze defense before the wound, before the trauma. So I give you just examples of client stories that are a little clearer, I think. An emotionally repressed client always books an important meeting directly after her therapy session, right? So she can never truly go in because she has a really important meeting. And so she's always kind of holding herself. So that would be a defense to actually going inside, right? She's kind of cornering herself to not give herself the true space that she would need. A client arrives at his first therapy session saying that he's working with 3 different therapists and a coach. That would be another defense. It's a kind of therapeutic polyamory. But what it also means is you can't trust anybody. You can't let anyone in. So you got to keep like safety in numbers. You know what I mean? You got like a million different people, a million different cooks in the kitchen. You're not going to get close to anybody. That's a defense. A client always arrives late, has technical issues, is interrupted by her family while doing therapy. That's just another, it's like bad boundaries, right? You see it right there. And once again, it's don't look at it, whether in your partner or in someone else or a client, as just like a happenstance thing. I mean, and I'm a little bit, I'm a little annoying like this in the fact that like nothing gets past me in that regard. Like I notice every single thing. Someone's 1 minute late to my meeting, I'm like, all right, even if it's just a normal meeting, I'm like, okay, and then I'll track it. These days I always say, 2 or more is a pattern, and you can probably track it. But these days, if you're really, really good at pattern analyzing, you can see something once and say to yourself, that's probably a pattern. And I do these days. I'll see it once and I'll be like, okay, that's probably going to be a boundary cross, or it's probably going to be this, or it's probably going to be that. So a client is always fulminating about politics, the environment, animal shelters, corruption, and more. Well, that would be another thing that I'm going to speak about a little bit later, but it's this idea of, it's the projection, it's the issues are all out there. That would be another defense. The more upset someone is, and I'm going to get into this in the bonus section, but the more like enraged someone is with what's going on in the outside world, usually points to the fact that they haven't quite acknowledged what's going on in the inner world, right? And so all of that unmetabolized, unhealed pain is literally just generating toxicity that then they have to put somewhere. And so it acts like a kind of steroid to the vitriol they have towards, whoever it might be, the Republicans, the Democrats, the president, Putin, you name it, right? Like, we should be upset at many things out there. But when you do this work long enough, you can tell when someone is not just upset or sad, or, perhaps even should be compassionate about the whole situation. You can tell when someone is actually siphoning off unhealed toxicity within them and lumping it into the vitriol they feel towards someone externally. Like, you can tell it a mile off. It feels like something, it sounds like something. When you do the work over time, that dial of vitriol just gets reduced. So the more angry and fulminating someone is about something external, you can bet your bottom dollar that they are using that as a projection to energetically siphon off unhealed toxicity from a wound that they're not able to actually somatically and internally access and heal into an external target. Foundational practice. You know this by now, but I'm going to repeat it. Identify the repetitions. Trace them back to your wounds. Map the entirety of the complex if you can. Repetition, trigger, manager, defense, conflict style. First emotion, second emotion, right? Latent emotion, superficial emotion. Conflict style or fireman. Collateral damage in life, the rationalizations. Begin pre-production. Let your significant other know when this happens, why, and what you need. Let them heal you. Let them, and supervise them while they heal you. And don't get me wrong, I want to be so clear. There are many people where this is not going to work, at least in the beginning, and you're going to need a professional. Absolutely. Like, I acknowledge that. I'm all about professionals, but I also know that a lot of people can't afford it. It's very cost prohibitive, and some people are not even ready. And I always say, especially in families, especially with husbands, it seems, I say to the wife, look, start the process. And what'll happen is, if you can get the process going, at some point he'll turn to you and be like, I think I need to work with someone. And that is going to take off just a ton off your shoulders of weight and responsibility. But until you begin to kind of work those angles, in some regards, you're enabling him, you're accommodating him. And perhaps vice versa. Same with the woman. There are some men out there, I do think it's an 80-20, but whoever it is, regardless of who you are in that partnership dynamic, start the work. Because even if you are working with someone, no matter who you're working with, and take it from me, you're still going to be dysregulated in the couple and in the family. And so you need these tools online. That's why I'm so passionate about bringing them, kind of democratizing them, and really saying, like, it's our responsibility. I'm all about bringing the power home, and especially biologically. I still work with some wonderful naturopaths and doctors, but I am all about bringing our ability to heal ourselves home, whether it's with devices or really learning about the supplementations. Certainly, having worked with Dr. Klinghardt and others, muscle testing, ART testing. I mean, there are many, many things we can do. And it's to understand yourself, I think, is just a responsibility at this particular time in life. We cannot assume that anyone else is going to care for us as much as we are. So we have to empower ourselves on that level. So successfully implement healing in the moment of dysregulation. Begin to rewrite the pattern from trigger, dysregulation, conflict, exile, to trigger, dysregulation, expressing vulnerability, accepting support, re-regulating, and repairing. It's going to be hard, but I would say just start working those angles. And I may put in a secondary little crib sheet explanation video just to go through that process one more time. Periodically practice the executive meditation, once you know that. Sweeping the concentric circles of your life. This is going to be so valuable. And of course, activate the heart. Rinse and repeat until enlightened. Don't forget to see the child behind the dragon. Don't forget that the child, fair maiden, little boy, is hiding behind the dragon, hiding behind the zombie suit of armor. Part of developing your courage is seeing that. Part of embodying your courage is feeling it. And at some point, you're going to be able to feel it. And that's an incredible skill. And so I hope you go on this journey with me. Okay. Thank you so much for another wonderful session. I hope this was useful. Peace in.